Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you. We're meeting every weekday during May at noon Pacific time to remind each other who we really are and to empower each other to be the light that we are. When I was in high school, I was very envious of a guy named Rich Brown. He was the quintessential cool guy, good-looking, president of the student council, captain of the football team. His girlfriend was a cheerleader, everything that was valuable in high school, he was. And I always felt like I was kind of weird and he was cool. And I always wished I could be on the in crowd with him. And many years later, I ran into Rich and I confessed. I said, Rich, when we were in high school, I always thought you were the coolest guy and you were the epitome of the guy in the in crowd. And he said, Alan, he says, that's really weird. He says, because I thought you were the coolest guy, and you were in the in crowd, and I was out. And I had to laugh. This was the craziest thing I had ever heard. And I realized that a lot of us walk with some sense of unworthiness or perceived weirdness or not fit in-ness. Then years later, I was watching the Beatles anthology. It's a wonderful series. If you can catch it, it's very illuminating. And Ringo told the story. And he said that one day at the height of the Beatles' fame, he realized that the other three guys were the real Beatles and he was kind of a phony. So he went to George and he said, George, I've been thinking, you guys are the real talented ones and I'm not, so I'm going to quit the band. George said, it's amazing you should mention that because I've been thinking that you three guys are the real Beatles and I'm not the talented one. So I'm going to quit. And I think they went to Paul or John and one of them had the same story. How crazy is that? Now the Beatles were the Beatles. They wouldn't have been the Beatles without those four guys. They were all immensely talented in their own way. But even at the height of being the most popular entertainers in history, and having hundreds of thousands of screaming girls throw themselves at them, each one of them felt that there's something wrong with me and I don't belong here. Now, how crazy is that? And so there's a phenomenon called fraud guilt. It's also called imposter anxiety. And it says that I'm a fraud, and if you knew the truth about me, you wouldn't want me to like me. And if you're honest, there's probably part of your mind that believes that. Now, I noticed that when we do our life coach training, we do a holistic training, and everybody has to fill out an application form. And one of the questions is, what fears or concerns do you have about becoming a holistic life coach? And a lot of people say, I would say the majority of people say, well, who am I to coach? I'm working on my own stuff. I'm not perfect yet. Why would anybody pay me to help them? And I tell them that half of the training is about confidence and half the training is about skill. And all those people who put on their application, why would anybody want to learn from me or be coached by me? They become fabulous coaches, and a lot of them are making really good livings being a coach, even though at the outset they struggled with fraud guilt. So who is the real fraud? Now, a lot of you know that I studied with a very wonderful mystic named Hilda Charlton many years ago. And she used to give classes in the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. 300-400 people would show up weekly. And one week I had an attack of guilt between classes. And I decided that I would make a public confession. So at the beginning of her class the next week, I stood up on stage and I took the microphone. I said, well, I'm a phony. I said, there are lots of things you don't know about me that if you knew me, you wouldn't want me. And I lie about certain things, and my relationships don't work really well, and certain people I avoid because I'm afraid of them. And I made a long list of my flaws and sins. And at the end of this conversation, I gave the mic back to Hilda. She said, guys, Alan's right. he is a phony. She said, but he's not a phony in the way he thinks he is. She says, he's a phony because he believes that he's his human flaws instead of his divine identity as a perfect child of God. Boy, did that get my attention. And I think in that one moment, she cured me of fraud guilt. I've never gone there again, maybe in little bits and pieces, but not like that. Because I realized that the part of you that thinks you're a phony, that's the phony. That's the fraud. So people took a survey of CEOs of top Hollywood studios, movie studios, and they asked them, what is your biggest fear? And the most common answer was, my biggest fear is that people will realize they don't really know what I'm doing. Meanwhile, they were doing fabulous jobs, earning millions and millions of dollars for the studio with top-notch movies. So the truth was that, they did know what they were doing. But this little voice in the back of their head said, you're phony. And it's just not true. Now, even if you don't fit in with the mainstream, that's a good thing. Some folks wrote a book on cultural creatives, and they said there's, at the time, this was 20 years ago, 40, 50 million people in our country who don't fit in to the standard religion and neighborhood and marriage model. And they think they're weird, but there's 40 or 50 million of them. And once they start coming out of the closet, they realize, hey, we don't fit in, but we're doing pretty good on our own. And then Dee and I saw a movie the other night. I think it's called What a Girl Wants. A very cute movie about an American teenager who realizes that her father's an English nobleman, and she goes to claim her identity with him. And she doesn't quite fit in England because everything is kind of formal and stuffy there, and she's a wild American teenager. And she meets this guy, and she's struggling with trying to fit into the British mode. And she's not happy because she gave up her American playfulness for kind of a straight-laced demeanor. And he said to her, why try to fit in when you're born to stand out? Why try to fit in when you're born to stand out? So somebody wrote a book called The Enemy Called Average. I didn't read the book. There's a lot of good books that you can just read the title and get the whole story. The Enemy Called Average. And so I don't really want to fit in anymore. I don't fit in anymore. I fit in with the people I fit in with, and the rest of the people fit in with each other. That's fine. God designed the system so people fit in where they belong. But the point is that you belong somewhere. And that there is a community of people, you might call them spiritual or alternative or holistic or whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter, who believe the same things that you do, who understand you, who accept you, who respect you, who honor you, and who want you. And that's good enough. No one has ever pleased everybody. Jesus didn't please everybody. Gandhi didn't please everybody. Martin Luther King didn't please everybody. People who are great transformational change agents had people who were against them precisely because a lot of people are afraid of the light. And for some people who are deeply steeped in fear, the light and love are terrifying to them. So if you terrify some people by your light and your love, that's not your problem. And it's not your fault. They have to figure it out. They have to be on their own learning curve. And everybody has something they're working on that is the cutting edge of their growth. And if you're on the planet Earth in a body, there's something that you're trying to figure out. You might call it an issue, you might call it a challenge. Buddha said that everybody's suffering somehow. And I used to kind of resist that because I don't want to be suffering. But it doesn't mean that you're writhing in pain or you shouldn't be here. There's something terribly wrong with you. It means that there's something you're facing that you could grow from addressing. I remember years ago I saw an infomercial one night, and it was by a psychologist who was specializing in couples relationships. And he had a famous couple as his guest on this infomercial. And you'd recognize their names. They're both famous celebrities. I won't say their names, but you'd know them if I mention them. And they were the poster couple. They were like the happiest couple in the world. They were cooing and loving each other, holding each other's hands. And he was kind of demonstrating them as a model couple. And then within a year or two, it was discovered that this man had been set up by a tabloid to have an affair with a flight attendant. And they had photographs of him and this woman in this hotel, and kind of messed up his reputation. So he was the happiest of couples who had something going on behind the scenes. And when I watched that video, when I watched that information, I thought, wow, something's wrong with me, because the couple I'm in is not as happy as they are. I must be defective somehow. And they have it all together. They're perfect. They're wonderful. And I compared myself to them, and I judged myself in comparison to them. But they had stuff going on too. It was the illusion of happy, happy, wonderful, wonderful. Oh, la, 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 la. I never believe that. When someone comes to me for coaching, say everything's wonderful, no problem. Well, cool, I'm glad to hear it, but is there anything you're looking at? Is there anything you'd like to address? Well, maybe. And usually those people have the most to address because they're in major denial. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be happy. If you could be happy all the time, please do. But the point I'm making is that don't judge yourself if you got stuff going on, because everybody does. I used to hang out with Abraham and Jerry and Esther Hicks occasionally, many years ago. And one night we were having dinner, and I asked Esther a question. And she said, would you like me to bring Abraham? I said, well, sure. Who wouldn't do that? So Abraham gave me a very nice answer. And afterwards I said, thank you, Abraham. That was really helpful to me. And Abraham said, we're all in this together. We're all in this together, which means that we're all having our human experience. We have highs and lows, and our relationships work and they don't. We feel good and we don't. We have money ups and downs. And it's just part of being on the planet Earth. Can we just accept that? I am doing it more and more and more. Now, you might also be in with somebody that you think you're not in terms of relationship. I'll give you a very cute example. When I was 15 years old, I went off to summer camp, a Jewish summer camp. And there was a girl I had a crush on named Roberta. And they kept the boys on one side of the lake and the girls on the other side of the lake with good reason. But occasionally they'd let us get together. And one night, they took us all roller skating to this local roller skating rink. And I got to skate with Roberta, and we held hands for one song. Boy, was I in heaven. I didn't wash my hands for a week. I didn't wash them anyway, but I especially didn't wash them during that week. And I thought she was the coolest girl. She was just sweet and gorgeous. I just had a major crush on her. But I thought, what would she want with me? I'm not cool. And so I didn't do anything else with her for the rest of the summer. And we went home. We went back to our respective lives. And I ran into her at a party a couple of years later. And she had an engagement ring. I guess she was 18 or 19 by that time. And I said, I have a confession to make, Roberta. She said, I had a major crush on you, but I didn't think you would really want me. And she said, well, I have a confession to make to you, Alan. She said, I had a major crush on you, but I didn't think you would want me. Ooh! Have you ever heard that expression, gobsmacked? Pooh! And then she held up her ring and she said, if things were different, if either of us had spoken up, maybe this would be your ring on my finger. And she wasn't being snotty. I think she was just kind of waxing philosophical. And I said, yeah, duh. Well, we went our separate ways, and we didn't belong together anyway, because she went on to a strict religious life and I went on to a strict different life. So, but it was a poignant moment for me to recognize that I had judged against myself in this relationship that could have been, and so did she. And so we're all kind of walking around, a lot of us are walking around thinking, I'm less than, when meanwhile we're equal to. So what I want to suggest to you, my dear friends, is that if you feel like you're on the out crowd and you want to be in, you feel like there's something wrong with you, you want to be right, I want to suggest that in a way you're already in. You're already in with God, you're already in with yourself, you're already in with people who love you, and you're already in with the universe. You can never be out with the universe. Have a great day. We'll see you on Monday.